There's a number that shows up on almost every routine blood work panel that nobody ever once mentioned in the same breath as my bathroom trips. And it turned out to explain more about my failing bladder than 14 years of urologist visits ever managed to. I didn't find it in a medical journal. I found it because my own daughter-in-law, of all people, finally asked me a question nobody else had thought to ask. I'm 83 now, and my bladder empties the way it did decades ago. One trip, done. No lingering pressure, no second guessing. 6 years ago, I would have told you my body was simply an old machine wearing down, no different than a hinge that finally rusts through, and I never questioned that story for a single day. I was wrong, and the number I mentioned a moment ago is exactly where the real answer had been hiding the whole time. I'm 83, and these days when I use the bathroom, I'm actually done. No going back 20 minutes later. No lying awake wondering if I should try again. My body finishes the job it starts, the way it's supposed to. You'd think a bladder that never truly empties is simply a muscle giving up after 80 years of use, the way anything mechanical wears thin eventually. But here's what didn't add up when I finally dug past the easy explanation. The muscle tested completely normal on every scan. It wasn't failing. Something else was keeping my prostate growing well past the point most men stop, and nobody had ever connected that dot for me. For 14 years, my life ran on a loop that never let up. I'd use the bathroom, feel that lingering pressure like a held breath that wouldn't release, and be back within the hour, sometimes sooner. At night, it doubled the misery, up 3-4 times, never with the relief of actually finishing, just the temporary quiet before it started building again. I mapped every bathroom on every route I drove. I stopped taking the 2-hour trip to see my brother without 3 planned rest stops. I sat through family dinners doing quiet math about how long I could last before I had to excuse myself again. My wife watched this happen for over a decade without ever saying much. She'd notice the 3rd trip in an hour and just look at me, that patient worry she never put into words. I told myself it was simply what happened to a man's body after 80 years of use, the price of living this long, something to endure rather than understand. I didn't tell my friends the real numbers. I gave my doctor a softened version, because somewhere in me I believed that admitting the full truth meant admitting something about my own decline I wasn't ready to face out loud. I also carried extra weight through most of my 60s and 70s, mostly around the middle, the way a lot of men do after decades of desk work and evenings in a recliner. I never connected that weight to my bathroom trips. Why would I? Nobody had ever suggested there was a link. I thought of it as 2 separate problems, my waistline and my bladder, each one its own private failure I was managing quietly and separately, never once suspecting they were tangled up in the same underlying cause. There's a particular grief in watching 2 parts of your life decline at once and assuming they're unrelated, both just symptoms of getting old, both things to simply endure. I remember standing in front of the mirror some mornings, frustrated with my own reflection, frustrated with my own bladder, and never once thinking those 2 frustrations might share a single root. My doctor confirmed an enlarged prostate years ago and started me on medication, which helped some, took the edge off, brought some relief to the mechanical squeeze. But it never fully solved the emptying problem, and every time I asked why, I got some version of, the prostate grows with age, this is common. I accepted that answer for years longer than I should have because it sounded reasonable enough and I had no reason to question it. What finally cracked it open for me was an envelope my daughter-in-law mailed me one week with no note attached beyond a sticky flag that said, "Read this, thinking of you." She works in nutrition counseling, and the article she'd clipped explained something that changed how I understood the whole situation. An enlarged prostate squeezing the urethra is real and well understood, but growth itself doesn't stop just because of age. In a meaningful share of men, the prostate keeps growing because of something entirely separate from the aging process: chronically elevated insulin, the kind that builds up quietly over years in men carrying extra weight around the middle, with blood sugar that runs a little high more often than not. That excess insulin doesn't just affect blood sugar, it acts as a growth signal throughout the body, and prostate tissue responds to that signal the same way other tissues do. It keeps growing because it's being told to, independent of testosterone, independent of age alone. What that article reframed for me was an assumption I'd never once questioned, that the prostate simply grows because a man gets older, full stop, the same inevitable process as gray hair or wrinkles. Turns out a meaningful share of that growth is being actively driven by a metabolic condition that has nothing to do with the calendar and everything to do with what's happening in the bloodstream, a condition that, unlike age, can actually be influenced. The prostate tissue itself, you support. You can't talk a gland into shrinking overnight, but the insulin driving its continued growth is something you can absolutely address, starting with your next meal. The article also explained why this rarely gets mentioned in a doctor's office. It isn't that doctors don't know the metabolic connection exists, the research has been building for years. It's that a standard appointment runs around 8 minutes, barely enough time to check a prostate exam box and adjust a medication dose, let alone open a conversation about blood sugar, weight, and how they connect to a symptom the patient walked in complaining about. It's not that nobody knows, it's that nobody's been given the time to explain it properly. What struck me hardest was realizing how many separate specialists I'd seen over the years without a single one connecting these dots out loud. My primary doctor managed my blood sugar in one conversation. My urologist managed my prostate in a completely separate conversation, months apart, in a different office. Neither one ever sat down and said, "These two things you're dealing with might be the same problem wearing two different faces." It took a mailed article and a daughter-in-law with no appointment clock running and nothing to bill to finally connect what a fragmented system never had the structure to connect on its own. For years, one number ran my life, the PSA. It would tick up a point and I'd lie awake the whole night, certain it meant the worst, picturing the biopsy, the knife, the end of everything. Then someone finally told me the truth no doctor had. That number doesn't measure cancer, it measures your prostate. And as we age, it climbs mostly because the gland is simply enlarging, benign, swollen, and uncomfortable, not the worst. The number was scaring me half to death over something ordinary. And the prescriptions they push to shrink it? They can flatten your drive completely, soften everything, quietly take the man right out of you. I wasn't willing to trade that away. There's a gentle way to support that gland, keep it comfortable, a healthy size, without surrendering any of that. Keep getting checked every year, of course. At 83, that number doesn't own me anymore. I finally have peace. Let me show you what gave it to me in this video. And if you want the simple support I personally use, there's a free presentation linked in the description below. The root cause, according to the research that article cited, is insulin resistance, the same metabolic pattern behind prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, present in a huge share of men over 60, whether or not they've ever been formally diagnosed. The large study the article pointed me toward, looking at over 15,000 men across 21 separate studies, found metabolic syndrome consistently associated with larger prostates and more severe urinary symptoms, including the incomplete emptying that had defined my nights and days for 14 years. It's not a cure, and it doesn't shrink the prostate overnight. What it appears to do, based on the research and what my daughter-in-law walked me through afterward, is remove the growth signal that's been quietly fueling the problem underneath the mechanical squeeze everyone already knew about. Addressing it wasn't about some dramatic diet overhaul. That article, and a follow-up phone call with my daughter-in-law once I'd actually read it, walked me through a short system, and I've kept every part of it since. First, cutting back sharply on processed foods and refined sugar. Not eliminating everything, just recognizing that the bread, the pastries, the sugary drinks were keeping my insulin elevated around the clock. Second, a short walk after meals, even just 10 or 15 minutes, which research has linked to better blood sugar control in the hours right after eating, when insulin tends to spike hardest. Third, longer gaps between meals in the evening, stopping eating a few hours before bed rather than snacking right up until lights out, giving my body a real stretch of time with lower insulin overnight. Fourth, double voiding at every bathroom trip, which addressed the mechanical piece directly while the metabolic piece worked in the background. 4 parts, none of them expensive, none of them requiring me to give up food I loved entirely. I'll be honest, this was the slowest of anything I've tried, and I want to say that plainly rather than promise something instant. The first month felt like nothing had changed at all, and there were nights I nearly gave up, telling myself I'd wasted a month chasing something that sounded too indirect to actually matter. By week 6, the lingering pressure after using the bathroom had started showing up less often. By week 10, I was going once and staying done more nights than not, and the nighttime trips had dropped from 3 or 4 down to 1. I lost about 14 pounds over those first few months too, mostly without trying very hard, a side effect of eating differently rather than a goal I'd set out to chase. My doctor noticed at my next checkup before I even mentioned it, and when I told him what I'd been doing, he didn't dismiss it. He told me to keep at it and said he'd keep an eye on my numbers, which is exactly the kind of partnership I want for anyone listening to this. He also ran a blood sugar panel that visit, the first one I'd had specifically requested in years rather than folded automatically into a routine check. It came back better than it had in a long while, and for the first time a number on a lab report actually connected out loud to how my bathroom trips had been going. That connection, seeing it in writing from someone with a medical degree, meant more to me than I expected. It made the whole thing feel less like a theory and more like something real I'd actually influenced. I'm 83, and my bladder does now what it's supposed to do. Empties, stays empty, and lets me get on with my day without a second thought. I finally made that 2-hour drive to see my brother without a single planned stop, first time in over a decade. I sat through my granddaughter's entire graduation without that held breath feeling pressing on me the whole ceremony. I trust my own body again in a way I'd genuinely forgotten was possible. That's not a small thing. That's a piece of my confidence handed back to me. I think about a man named Merle, 75, who found this after his daughter, a nurse, sent it to him. Merle had been dealing with incomplete emptying and frequent nighttime trips for close to 11 years and had quietly accepted it as simply his lot at his age. He started the dietary changes and the after-meal walks, kept at it for about 3 months, and told his daughter he'd forgotten what it felt like to trust his own bladder. I'm not sharing that as proof it works for every man. Bodies are different, and Merle's doctor still monitors his blood sugar and his prostate closely, same as mine does. I'm sharing it because it's the kind of quiet, gradual change that never makes headlines, but rebuilds a man's whole sense of control over his own body. None of what I'm describing replaces your doctor or whatever treatment you're already on. If you're taking medication for your prostate, your blood sugar, or your bladder, keep taking it exactly as prescribed, keep every appointment, and talk to your doctor before changing anything. This works alongside your care, never instead of it. What I'm telling you is that the growth nobody explained to me, the piece that kept my prostate expanding well past what age alone would predict, had a name and a cause I could actually influence. And understanding that gave me back years I thought were simply gone. I'd encourage anyone listening to this to ask their own doctor for a full metabolic panel at the next visit, if it's been a while since your last one. It costs little. It takes a single blood draw, and it might connect dots in your own situation that nobody's ever had the time to connect for you. Here's what I settled on, a few drops a day. And let me tell you why it works. One compound calms one signal, but a swollen prostate answers when several are calmed at once. The growth signal, the inflammation, the pressure inside it. So what I use concentrates them, working as one, the way the research actually uses them, not a single ingredient pretending to be enough. A gland that stays comfortable and a healthy size, fewer trips, and the quiet of no longer fearing that number. It leaves the man fully intact, none of that flattening the prescriptions can do. It's linked right under this video, go look for yourself. It won't replace your doctor or your yearly check. It supports the biology right alongside them. I'm 83, and that number doesn't own me anymore. What I want you to walk away with is this. Your bladder never truly emptying isn't just the toll of getting old, and it isn't some mystery your doctor is deliberately hiding from you on purpose. I spent 14 years assuming decline was the whole story, when really there was a driver underneath it I could have addressed years earlier if anyone had explained it to me plainly. I think about the man I was, sitting through family dinner doing silent math about the nearest bathroom, gripping a dark hallway wall at 2 a.m, too tired to be angry and too proud to say how bad it had actually gotten. And I think about the man I am now, 83, driving 2 hours without a plan, trusting a body I genuinely stopped trusting years earlier. That's dignity. That's independence. That's what I'd want for any man watching this who still feels like he's never quite finished. If your own bladder has never felt truly empty, tell me in the comments how long you've been living with that feeling, and whether anyone's ever mentioned your blood sugar in the same conversation. I read every single one, and I want to know I'm not the only man who carried this quietly for over a decade. And if this gave you a different way to understand your own body, subscribe, because there's more of what I've learned still coming, and I don't want you to miss it.